the conquerors, right, who was afraid, to look at that. So it is about coming into your power and rediscovering yourself. And the big thing that we're rediscovering as a society is our feminine sides. And Terence brought it up really well. In the beginning, there were the goddess religions, Mother Earth, Gaia, mushroom cults, things of that nature. And the way Terence described it, and I tend to think that I believe this to be true, is that we were female-dominated, for lack of a better word, and the women screwed it up. So the guys took over and said, well, I'm going to take over, I'm going to take charge. Well, look where the hell they brought us, right? And I say hell, yeah, because it's worse, right? So now we're going back and bringing back the feminine, not to take over, but to be equal. And that's the ascension of the goddess and the rise of the feminine and the heart that's coming out. And then when we're more balanced as individuals and our intellect and our emotions are balanced, then we can deal with things from a more effective, balanced perspective. And that's very important. I've studied a lot about sacred geometry, which ties in with crop circles, and also ancient Egypt. And there were talks of even, which I tend to believe now from all that I've read, about Atlantean civilizations who were the precursors to the Egyptians. And they would talk about the fact that why didn't they find more written language? And what I read, which really rung true to me, is that they were communicating with their hearts and not their minds. And if anybody's ever had any experience with ayahuasca, when they first discovered it, they said that the active ingredient, they called it telepathy. And when you get into an ayahuasca space in a good group of people and you're really in sacred space together, your hearts are connected, and the telepathy starts to happen. You start to have telepathic experiences. So I believe that the more we're leading with our heart instead of our brains, the more we will transcend the intellect and the written language and the confusion and even the Tower of Babel and all the different languages in the world. It doesn't matter what language you speak. If you're coming from your heart, you will connect with somebody because it's an energetic and it's from spirit, which is beyond the rational, the material as we know it. So thinking of the heart as a superior method of communication would explain why there wasn't a lot of written language in the past and why those advanced societies didn't, because they were communicating with their hearts, because the heart is what has been left behind or trampled over in the world, today as we know it, with all the chaos and the war and the bombs and all that stuff.
I was, as you were just talking, I was thinking how the West has really infiltrated every place. There's McDonald's everywhere you go, and our ways have kind of made it down into the jungle, so there's no really pure society that's untouched by this now. But in the cultures where they're still practicing shamans, how do they bring the youth in? How do they initiate the younger people? At what age, and how does that done? And because it seems like now the shamanistic practices are seeping into the West, so we're kind of cross-pollinating. How are they handling it in a Western world, dominated world?
It's kind of a sad subject because what I've seen down in the Amazon is that the missionaries will come in, particularly with the Shipibo Indians. I've seen it. Well, they'll come in and they will say, oh, hey, look, we've got electric guitars and musical instruments and all this cool stuff. And you can play with them, but you got to come to church every day first. And there's a bit of bribery going on. And a lot of these pre-literate cultures who haven't had a lot of Western exposure see things like a boombox and stuff like that, and they just go bonkers over them because it's new. And so there's been a bit of a gap between the youth and the old age. One of the reasons I've been embraced by different cultures when I get on exploring is because I'm not coming down here saying, here's how it is, and here's what you need to do, and here's how you learn. I'm going down there saying, hey, I don't know shit. What can you show me? Because I'm here to learn. So they love that. But they do tend to, I know typically like in the Shipibos and things, somebody's going to get initiated into ayahuasca. They may be around 14 years old. And they also tend to marry earlier because you tend to grow up quicker because life is shorter and harder. So They do bring in young people to apprentice, but a lot of them are really distracted by all the pomp and circumstance, for lack of better words, of Western civilization. So they're always looking for people to pass on traditions to. And some of the people I've worked with have worked with the Shipibo Indians, and they have these patterns that are woven into cloth and put on pottery and things like that, and they're actually songs that are sung in. And if you go to Shipibo villages in the Amazon, you can buy lots of these things, but a lot of the people don't even know what they are. They're just copying these patterns that were shown to them. So the people I know will say to them, I need you to sing me this song that's in this cloth, and if you don't know the song, I don't want to buy your cloth. As a way of keeping the tradition alive. And the other thing that some people that I know are doing are they're getting people to come in and pay the money to get the Shipibos certified by the federal government of Peru so they can come and teach in their own schools. So they can teach your tradition and the history that's getting eroded and faded away. Because, you know, there's visions of Indians in the jungle running around with feathers in their heads and all that, and there is some of that, but for the most part, because of the history, there's a mestizo population, there's lots of mixed races, and there's been all this movement going on. So there aren't as many pure Indian traditions left. They're diminishing rapidly. But regardless, the traditions themselves are living on, even though the people may not be pure blood, the traditions are living on.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. So is that a good...
That answers that question. It's not a happy answer necessarily,
no.
But it sounds like they're trying to compensate as best they can, given the conditions, getting into the schools themselves and teaching the traditional methods.
Yeah, I had another eye-opening experience some years back in Peru where I had been out in the pristine jungle for 10 days, and we came back downriver by canoes for, a couple hours and got to the first village, and we're all just like blissed out and wide-eyed from this intense jungle experiences with plants and all that. And we get off the boat, and there's these kids at this village, and they're drinking their water from the plastic bottles and throwing them in the river. And we're just about had a heart attack. I mean, what are you doing? They don't know any better, and that's what's been given to them. And they're where I've gone, there are mahogany poachers, and it's not a good thing. But you realize that these people are struggling just to survive and just to exist, and they've been inundated with Western culture and society in ways that throws their ways out of balance. So they're just struggling to survive. So even though you can think, on one level, okay, you got all the Standard Oil and Shell and Exxon and Mobil and all that, right? And Enron and all that. I mean, yeah, they're rapers and pillagers, but it's also happening on a lower level with people who are truly ignorant, who don't know the bigger picture, and they're struggling just to survive, just to have a meal for the next day. So it's kind of a sad thing.
Yeah, it is. Well, we're I'd like to sit here and keep going, but we're going to have a file size a little too large to download. But one of the and definitely, I'll obviously be back. I'll be back a lot of times.
You'll be back
to do another recording, and perhaps we'll get some feedback from some of our listeners, some questions they'd like to give you too. But we've got a very the audience is just like the tribe. There are 60-year-old men and women who have and haven't done psychoactives. There are 17-year-old young men and women who have or haven't. But it's a big, broad range. A lot of people are feeling pretty isolated, pretty alone. Because I know before I kind of connected with the tribe, I was the same way. I was in a situation where at the time my partner didn't approve of all this stuff, and your friends, relatives, neighbors, coworkers, you can't really talk to them about it. And I don't know if you've got any words of wisdom for the lonely traveler out there who's trying to answer these questions, but if you have any words of wisdom, I'd sure love to hear them.
Well, for starters, I don't know how this will come out in the right way, but keep your mouth shut. Because on one level, we're in a snitch society. So if you don't know somebody, don't deal with them. And be careful if somebody approaches you, too. There have been stories of, they send out squads at Burning Man, and they'll dress a certain way, and you'll get this babelicious come up to you and, or doodleicious if you're a babe yourself, and approach you to want to do certain things that are not legal. And you can get yourself into some deep doo-doo. So unless you really know somebody really well, don't. Better safe than sorry. And along with that, if you keep your mouth shut, they can't read your mind. So don't say anything, that could be recorded in any way, whether it's on your cell phone or if you're doing something on email, whatever. Be careful, because you just don't know. And there's all this really sick things going on in our society. So be careful. And I guess as sort of a final note, I want to mention, I mentioned this a couple of times, I think, that what you do with these medicines, the intention you put behind it is what's important. And so if you put a healing intention behind it, and you really do some good ceremony and some really good, pure intention for healing yourself and the earth, after all this chaos I've been through, that's the best approach. And that's a shamanic approach, and that's an ancient approach that has gone on since before history as we know it, since prehistoric times. There's a sacredness to it all. So if you keep that in mind and careful what you get and be careful who you deal with, you'll do okay.
About the only thing I'd add is, hey, don't take yourself too seriously either.
That's right.
And with that, I think we'll call this a day, and we'll return for more.
Thank you for indulging me, because I sure enjoyed it.
Well, it took a little while for us to get up to speed, but as you can tell, Mateo has not only been to the edge quite a few times, he's also brought back a lot of valuable information. While it isn't obvious to someone who hasn't known Matt for a long time, the changes that he's made in his approach to life and in his attitude about life since beginning in earnest to follow a shamanic path have really been quite obvious to his friends and family, and very remarkable. I know a lot of urban shaman who talk a good talk, but Mateo, as his friends call him, he also walks the walk. And believe me, he has gone through more than anyone's allocated share of ordeals, both physical and extra-dimensional. And to tell you the truth, his training put him through a lot more intensive work than I'm willing to do myself. So just like in any indigenous tribe, we rely on our shaman to go out there to the far, far edge of reality and come back with something we can use in our own lives and do it without the risk and hassle involved in doing such intensive work ourselves. But if you do discover such a calling for yourself, you might want to contact Mateo directly to learn more about shamanic apprenticeships. And I've placed a link to his website on our page with the program notes to this podcast, which is number 80, by the way. And you can find links to this and all of our program notes via our main podcast page, which is at www.matrixmasters.com/podcasts. And there you'll find a link to the notes from the Psychedelic Salon blog, where you can also comment on these podcasts and on other items of interest if you want. Speaking of items of interest, I wish I had time to mention all of the email I've received in the past month. And if I haven't replied to you personally, that isn't because I don't appreciate the great thoughts and comments that you're sending. For example, Casper writes from Denmark to say, among other things, now, I didn't even know about Terence McKenna, Mind States conferences, or your psychedelic salon at the start of 2006. But this all changed in what feels like 50 years reduced to 1 year. Now, one would be a newbie in this game with only 1 year experience, but that's not what it seems like when you can learn more in 1 day than what it used to take 1 year. The psychedelic experience changed my whole life so fast that I can't believe it myself. Well, I sure do know what you mean, Casper. At times I've felt the same way and wondered where all this was leading. And then I'd have a little setback of some kind and seem to lose the plot again, which is something they don't teach you in Psychedelics 101, by the way. And that is that while these sacred medicines can help you make enormous strides in your personal growth, it's still up to you to do the hard work of bringing what you discovered during one of those profound experiences back into your everyday life. And once you get to know a lot of people who are also on this path, one of the first things that will strike you most likely is that even with the help of these wonderful medicines, there are still a lot of really screwed up people in the tribe. In the final analysis, these medicines that we call entheogens or psychedelics, well, there's something like money. They don't really change you. They just make you more of what
the conquerors, right? Who was afraid, to look at that. So it is about coming into your power and rediscovering yourself. And the big thing that we're rediscovering as a society is our feminine sides. And Terence brought it up really well. In the beginning, there were the goddess religions, Mother Earth, Gaia, mushroom cults, things of that nature. And the way Terence described it, and I tend to think that I believe this to be true, is that we were female-dominated, for lack of a better word, and the women screwed it up. So the guys took over and said, well, I'm going to take over, I'm going to take charge. Well, look where the hell they brought us, right? And I say hell, yeah, because it is worse, right? So now we're going back and bringing back the feminine, not to take over, but to be equal. And that's the ascension of the goddess and the rise of the feminine and the heart that's coming out. And then when we're more balanced as individuals and our intellect and our emotions are balanced, then we can deal with things from a more effective, balanced perspective. And that's very important. I've studied a lot about sacred geometry, which ties in with crop circles, and also ancient Egypt. And there were talks of even, which I tend to believe now from all that I've read, about Atlantean civilizations who were the precursors to the Egyptians. And they would talk about the fact that why didn't they find more written language? And what I read, which really rung true to me, is that they were communicating